unless I'm forgetting something.
I don't think so.
It was pretty rare, but very special, and I hope that you guys enjoyed listening to that. We still have a lot of time left to fill, so we've pulled a couple of other interviews. These are not filler interviews. These are actually really great interviews. The first one is a logical step from this because it's from the same movie, Muppet Treasure Island, and this is Tim Curry, who played Long John Silver in the film.
He's had a varied career. I interviewed him for Congo years ago, but that was probably the only time I interviewed him. Obviously, I wasn't part of Muppet Treasure Island. Most people know him from Rocky Horror.
Yes, Dr. Frank-N-Furter.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting Tim Curry stuff within this interview.
Others, of course, probably know him from Annie or Clue or
Clue.
Legend.
Especially Clue, right?
Yeah, he played Pennywise in the 1990 TV miniseries It.
Very good in that one.
The first, not the more recent It, but the original. He's also done a lot of cartoon work. He played the father in The Wild Thornberrys. He was Nigel Thornberry. And personally, my absolute favorite was when he played King Chicken on the animated Jason Alexander cartoon Duckman.
Oh, I remember you being a fan of that show way back in the day.
Duckman is hilarious. I recommend it highly. It's out on DVD. Go get it. Tim Curry has also done a lot of stage work in both London and on Broadway. He starred in Hair, Amadeus, My Favorite Year, and Monty Python's Spamalot. And also, bringing the show full circle, Tim Curry was nominated for an Emmy Award in 1994 for an episode of Tales from the Crypt. And if you want to look that up, the episode is called Death of Some Salesman, and you can find it on YouTube. Curry actually plays an entire hillbilly family. He plays 4 different roles using lots of makeup, including 2 of them are women. So it's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's an interesting interview because you get a feel for how Curry handled his success from the Rocky Horror Picture Days, and also how he feels maybe, he's the kind of guy who steals a show in every project he's in, but you get the feeling that maybe he would have loved to have actually cinematically, that is, be a lead other than the Rocky Horror Picture. Also, I thought was interesting with the interview, what you're going to listen to is his love for gardening, which I had no idea. So that's really cool.
Who would?
You can imagine him traveling around the world doing all these London and New York productions on stage, as well as working in Hollywood, but really finding the pull of his garden to be the ultimate thing. So that it was a really interesting aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we hope you guys enjoy it. Here's Tim Curry.
What was it like playing with all those puppets, playing to all those puppets? Kind of weird at times, or?
It's peculiar, really, because at first it's very surreal. I mean, you think, I'm standing here talking to, a bunch of felt and latex. I mean, but I think they're so much a part of the culture, that, and you know them. I mean, they're sort of legends in their own lunchtime, aren't they? So you don't think of them as constructs. You think of them as actually sort of as movie stars. So after like a day or two, you don't even think about it. The suspension of disbelief is kind of total. And also, about 20 years ago, I did a series in England on the life of Shakespeare, and I played him from, 19 to the end of his life. And it was at Elstree in London, and Lou Grade at ITC did it. And in the next door studio was the Muppets, which were just starting their series. So I used to hang out there all the time, because it was a more fun place to be than the Globe Theatre. And so I was sort of used to being around them, and pretty much if a Muppeteer has the Muppet on, they tend to talk to you as the character anyway, not as themselves. I mean, it seems to be a kind of discipline. So it wasn't foreign to me at all.
Even when you were sword fighting with them, that's gotta be weird.
The sword fighting was peculiar. Not because it was a Muppet doing it, but because because it really throws the proportions out, rather, when you have a sort of human-sized sword and there's this little person with a kind of baby sword. It's quite difficult to take that seriously. The proportional thing is strange in a way, because I mean, if you're a human actor in a Muppet movie, your performance tends to be either in mid-shot or close-up, simply because of the proportional difference, which doesn't take long to get used to, but doesn't happen a great deal, and it's something that you have to think about, But also, I guess, the Muppets by their very nature have to be pretty animated in order to live. So you either have to be as animated as they are, or very still, in order to keep the reality of it, and God knows, to compete.
Well, according to the production notes, it said that a number of the people got actually seasick on the boat. Were you one of them?
I didn't actually barf or anything, but it is sort of bewildering that technically this stuff can be quite difficult, because once you shoot a scene from one side, and then when you turn around, they've got to saw out half of the floor to put the Muppeteers in so that they're low enough for the Muppets to be the right height, and then you have to choreograph the humans so that in very cramped spaces, so that the not only so that the Muppets look right, but so that they can see at their feet the TV cameras, the monitors that are showing them what they're doing. So it can take quite a long time to set up. So you can be off in your dressing room for like 2 hours and then suddenly be on the Spanish Main, which, particularly after lunch, that can be quite unnerving. And at the end of a long day, it could really get to you. But I'd worked on gimbals before, because I did The Hunt for Red October, which was equally liable to make you lose your lunch.
It is interesting, because I was looking over your filmography, and it occurs to me that this is probably the only film that you've been in where you didn't manage to steal the show completely. When I think back, from your first film, Clue, which is still one of my favorite films, did you feel a sense of competition with the Muppets?
No, I think obviously I felt that I had to, you pull off the character. But one of the remarkable things, I think, about this whole company, and of being part of the Muppets, is that it's wonderfully non-competitive in that sense. Not that people, don't want to be funnier than the next person, but that it's, most film sets are a festival of ego, and a Muppet film is remarkable for not being so. And I think this is very much the spirit of Jim Henson, and also, in a curious way, the last gasp of the 60s. Do you know? There's a very creative atmosphere, but not a competitive one. So that you feel that you really can come up with anything that if you have a good idea, it'll be listened to and either used or not. But you don't feel that kind of awful driven egos around the place. It's a marvelous place to work.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, and also the emphasis is very much on the narrative. I think they're really wonderfully written. This one in particular, because they are so. It's absolutely narrative driven. If you're not in the story, the movie fails. And at the same time, there are these kind of grace notes and moments when you completely come out of it, to throw in some aside, either for adults or to undercut the very basis of the thing for a joke, and then move on. But the narrative strength and push of it is absolute, and it's a very interesting place to work.
And you get to sing. That was kind of a neat little showstopper there, and I'm wondering what that was like to pull off, because it seemed like there was so much going on all at the same time while you're having to stay in character and sing. Well,
they don't. You don't get to sing in films much anymore. I mean, I've done it a bit. I mean, I did Annie, which was the sort of last of those dinosaur, big American movie musicals. I mean, and fascinating to do, because of that. But one thing that we did do on this show was that, I recorded the songs and we had playback. And when we had 2 or 3 good takes with playback, I did about 2 singing live. And we used all of them.
All the live ones?
All the live ones, yeah.
Why do you think it is? Because it's interesting because musicals haven't really done well. I mean, Newsies
Yeah.
kind of, and yet these type with the animated features and with the these little Muppet characters, they seem to do fine with musicals in them. So why do you think that they're able to do that? And
well, I think because you're kind of in Fantasyland anyway. I think one of the problems with musicals now, I mean, and actually, all this sort of tribute stuff to Gene Kelly, he was saying the same thing, that people actually don't buy it anymore. People don't buy you sort of putting down your knife and fork at lunch and and bursting into song. But because the whole idea of the Muppets is so hugely based in music hall and vaudeville and variety, and it makes sense, I think, for the characters to sing, and also I think they place the songs awfully well. I think also I also think that it's a very strong score. I think Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil did a brilliant job because it's a curious mixture of sort of pastiche Gilbert and Sullivan and sort of jolly vaudeville. And I think that all of the songs have great energy and attack. And I also think that Kermit and Miss Piggy's love duet. When I got to London, I'd been shooting on Congo for about 5 months, and I was pretty fried, and I'd just done the opening number at the Academy Awards, and the morning after the Academy Awards, I was on a plane to London to start the Muppets, and the next night I was in the studio recording the songs, and Frank Oz and Steve were recording "Love Led Us Here," the ballad, the love song duet between Miss Piggy and Kermit. And what's astonishing about it is, as they were there singing it, is that it's funny, but it also breaks your heart at the same time. And Kermit and Miss Piggy's love affair is, up there with Antony and Cleopatra and Romeo and Juliet. It's become, a sort of lodestone of romance, and I think it's terribly moving. But I was astonished while they were singing it, and that's why I think it's a brilliant song. That it's very simple and very clear, and while you think it's funny, it's also breaking your heart, and that's the area and where the Muppets operate. I think that's the great plus of kind of childhood and childlike fantasy, that anything is possible if you believe in it, and if you do it cleanly and clearly and with the sort of enormous heart that the Muppets have.
Why haven't, just for curiosity's sake, why haven't you done a Disney animated feature? Because you do all these great voices.
I do a lot of cartoons, actually. I mean, we've talked about doing them, and I just sort of, have never sort of got there. I mean, I guess, I'll probably do one in the end. Who knows? Sorry. No, but as yet, no, I haven't. I mean, I've done a lot of cartoons with them on television and stuff. I mean, I do a lot of cartoons. It's one of the I'm an obsessive gardener, so the way I pay for my garden is by doing cartoon voices.
What's some of the voices that you do in the cartoons?
Oh, gee.
Is there any recurring characters that you'd be like,
Oh, yeah.
DuckTales or whatever?
Yeah, well, I did a whole series of Peter Pan where I played Captain Hook, which was a sort of warm-up for Long John Silver. And I do a lot of Klasky Csupo ones. I do real monsters. I do an Argentinian wasp called a Zimbo. I talk very fast like me. And I do another character for Klasky Csupo, and I'm trying to think what it is. I show up in these things all the time. About 13 or 14 different series, so I can't actually remember all of the ones that I do.
I'm going to just take a wild assumption and guess that probably the character that you're most recognized for is from Rocky Horror. Would that be correct?
I think it depends. For people in the street, I don't know. For the media, certainly.
How do you deal with fan recognition? Because there's something, when I told people I was going to talk to Tim Curry, it's not the same as like, maybe, like a Tom Cruise. People feel very close to you. The people that care about you really care about you deeply. How do you deal with fans who I think probably have a more internally personal relationship with you?
Well, the very height of the madness, which was a sort of year-long period at the end of the 70s, I suppose, was a bit odd. In that I was living in New York at the time, which was really where the sort of madness was based. And in fact, I was living a block behind the Waverly Theatre where it all first happened. And also when I went into Amadeus, it was very easy for people to find me because they only had to wait outside the stage door. And in fact, after a while, I had to use a different entrance. And it was funny because David Bowie was doing Elephant Man in the next door theatre, and we used to run down the same alleyway to a block up to 45th Street. So some odd people did come, the odd Satanist came out of the woodwork, and people used to go through my garbage, and that was not a lot of fun. But what actually characterizes the Rocky Horror fan, oddly and charmingly, and for which I'm very grateful, is a real kind of respect, and they don't invade my privacy, and and I think from the mail that I get, one of the reasons that they're drawn to me is not just Frankenfurter, but the kind of range of the work that I've done, and they like to see me showing up in wildly different kinds of things, and they sort of seem to like that a lot, and since that's what I like, I feel very good about it. I'm very lucky in the fan department.
But what about, I suspect that that's changed radically, though, too, in terms of what people, I would think that the Home Alone movies, kids are reacting to you now.
I think that's certainly happened. And at airports, it's always, tiny children's jaws dropping. And I think I probably get recognized by kids as much as I do by anybody else. Supermarkets, airports.
Do they say anything?
Quite often they get sort of dragged up by their parents because they want to say something, but they're too shy to. I have a friend here, actually, whose son is about 5, and he is a huge Home Alone fan, and he calls me the boss of New York, because I seem to be in charge of everything that was going on in Home Alone 2. So, and he's astonished when I show up in other films. Mommy, the boss of New York is in this one. That has made a difference. Also, whatever's on television, whatever's just been shown on television is always. It's peculiar. Once you sort of start to get a body of work, you're never really quite sure what people are approaching you about. particularly when Rocky Horror is like 20 years ago.
They are all different, though.
They are, yeah.
I mean, they are, but they're all.
They are, and they tend to, yeah. Well, they're all a bit left of center, yes. They tend to be, because that's the more fun to play. I mean, I think the edges of human experience are probably a lot more fun to examine.
What are you being offered? Are you getting scripts that are 180 degrees away from characters, like the absurd ones?
I'm still such a kind of festival of contradictions that they still don't know what to do with me, really. I think I still operate as a maverick, and I tend to be asked to work by maverick directors. I think I remember sort of something like 5 or 6 years ago, I went to a new agent and they looked me up in the casting directory and it said, incredibly wide range, very difficult to cast. And I think in a lot of ways that's true. I mean, I don't, in their perception. So I think that, I tend to be asked to work by directors who get it.
Do you feel that there's a role or roles that have used you better than others, that you really felt you've had to go inside yourself more, maybe pull out more, maybe you've gotten more to who you see yourself as an actor?
Well, again, I think I would say Mozart and Amadeus when I did it in New York. I mean, because he had a real kind of arc to play, and I don't think the sort of genius end of it was, called up a great deal of recognition in my part, but I think the sort of that sort of relentless creativity, being misunderstood, was something that I identified with. I mean, in some ways, the problem, one of the things that shouldn't but does limit me is my Englishness in America. I mean, because there's that curious thing here that if you're seen to be the driving force of a great big hit, it doesn't matter anymore if you're Argentinian. You can play anything. But until that happens, if you're English, I mean, Eric Idle and I used to greet each other with butlers and villains. Butlers and villains. They're not terribly creative about that.
But the stage has offered you obviously other things. So how does that fit into your life now?
Well, I've been doing a play about every 3 years now, partly because I just, I don't want to forget how to do it. And if you stay away too long, you actually get scared. So I'm due for one pretty soon. But I've been pretty much concentrating on cameras because I want to get them right, And I also just got to a point where I was enjoying it so much more. Because there was more to discover, I think, because I spent 20 years in the theatre and mostly when I made films, I would make one at a time, and I'd already be committed to go back to England or to New York and do something in the theatre. So about sort of 7 or 8 years ago when I moved here, I came here because I wanted to concentrate on making films and understand how to work for a camera. And they don't really, make that many films in England anymore. And in a sense, I've spent more of my adult life in the States than I have in England, really. I probably think of myself as more American than British now. Just simply because I think that the culture that you exist and work in, is a huge amount of your identity.
Do you get back there?
Yes, I do. I mean, one of the nice things about making this film was that it was 3 months in London, working in London, and I hadn't worked in London for 8 or 9 years. And I hadn't made a film in England for, more than probably 10 or 11. So that was very nice, and it was the summer, and I had a, really pretty mews house behind Eaton Square, and it was very, very nice to be Although at first when I got home, but I mean I go home about 2 weeks every year to see my family and hang. Sometimes a little bit longer, but rarely more than 3 weeks. And this time, when I knew I was going to be there for a while, I mean, around every corner in London was some sort of piece of history. Some old apartment, and it was a bit haunting at first. It was strange. It threw me for a while. And then I just got back into the rhythm of London, which is a very specific one, I think.
Is it difficult then to come back here when you've been there for extended? Or?
No, because really since Rocky Horror, I've spent so much of my working life on planes, and I for 20 years I've been working in London, Los Angeles, and New York, and I'm just used to it now. I mean, it was a huge culture shock at first, and now it's pretty much second nature.
What about their perception of you?
The British perception of me?
Yeah, of you here.
I've no idea what what it is. And in fact, I'm going to do a piece for the Sunday Times soon, and it's one of the things that I'll be interested to actually ask him. Is you see, in a peculiar kind of way, I've always tried not to worry about what people's perception of me is, because I think it really just gets in your way, and you can't. And in a sense, I've been protected from that because I've sort of peddled between England and the States and these two coasts so much. I don't have a sense of how Americans see me or how the English see me anymore, and I sort of lost. I don't feel that I have a kind of obvious niche in that way, and I'm sort of grateful for that. I think anything that limits you, is baggage.
Well, you may be difficult to cast, but you're working all the time. So what's coming up next for you?
Well, I'm sort of looking at a few things. I haven't sort of really decided on the next one. I took a chunk of time off after this one because I really hadn't drawn breath for about 18 months, and I was just, by the end of this one, I was really fried. So, and I'd spent very little time at home too. So I've had the gloves on in the garden for a while, and I'm just trying to sort out now what I'm going to do next.
Is that what you do for fun?
Yeah.
You garden?
Yes. Well, I think, if you're English, somewhere around 30, a trowel appears in your hand like a sort of prosthetic device, and so yeah, I'm an obsessive gardener, I'm afraid.
Tell us about the very, very first time you were ever on a stage. How old were you? What were you doing?
Well, I guess the very first time I was about 4, and it was the village Christmas show in Cornwall in England.
What were you playing?
An elf, I think.
Had your career not been successful, had you not had a successful acting career, what might you be doing with your life now?
Well, every time I get fed up with acting, I try and think of something else that I could do. I think if I was going to do anything, I would probably write. But I can't think of anything else that would interest me, or anything else that anyone would want to employ me to do.
What kind of writing? Novels, plays?
I'd love to write a novel, yes. I've sort of started on some short stories and stuff. I'm actually really getting quite interested in it now.
Well, what about the idea of, since it was very interesting to hear you talking about your career, because as much as I've loved the films that you've been in, I've always had the sense that most of them haven't really used all of your talents. What about the idea of writing, directing, something that you could do what you want to do?
Well, I'm starting to be more interested in that because needs must, in a sense. I'd also I'd also at this point love to make a film or two in England. Simply because I think sometimes if you can get so far away from your original culture that you lose a kind of root strength, and I really recognized that when I was home doing the Treasure Island. There was a very comfortable feeling about that. Having said that, I mean, one of the things that's marvelous about making films here is that everyone's so generous with what they know. You know, I'm a relentless kind of. I mean, I tend to be on the set even when I'm not working because I want to know what lights do, and you know, I'm always truffling for what's going to make me better at it.
When you say that when you get fed up with the movie business, you're always thinking about things that you would do, what are the downsides of that would even cause you to think, because you're obviously doing well?
Well, you know, I mean, I would like to, you know, it'd be nice to play somebody, you know, intelligent and complicated, and you know, you can spend an awful lot of time here sidestepping cardboard villains, you know, or being given cardboard villains to play that you somehow have to, you know, make more interesting. You know, it's an occupational hazard for English actors here, I think.
We asked
We have time for. Thank you.
big bad
Sorry.
bosses.
Do you like before she walks you off? Do you like country music?
I love country music.
Who
Yes,
do you
indeed.
listen to and why?
Well, I love Willie Nelson. I'm a huge Willie Nelson fan, and actually, you know, when I had a band and was touring, I loved playing the South more than anything. I mean, when somebody asked me, you know, playing on Broadway, don't you get scared? And I said, if you've played a country club in Texas, you can play anywhere, believe me.
Thank you.
Have Maury give you lessons. She's
It's called Mr.
And we're back. So he wasn't kidding about his music career right there at the end. We didn't mention it before, but Tim Curry put 3 albums out in the late 1970s and the beginning of the 1980s, and he even had 2 moderate hit singles on American radio, I Do the Rock and Paradise Garage. So look for those wherever 8-track tapes are sold.
Nice.
Or find them on YouTube. I actually just watched the music video for I Do the Rock, and it's pretty hilarious.
How's the song?
Well, it sounds like a song that you've never heard of from the 1970s, which is exactly what it is. But it's pretty funny. I do recommend it, especially if you enjoy him as Dr. Frankenfurter, you enjoy his singing. It's campy just like that. In fact, I understand those 2 videos get played a lot of times at midnight screenings of Rocky Horror Picture Show. They'll start with the videos and then show the movie.
Oh, very cool.
So it pairs up with it nicely because it's campy and silly just like the movie is. Now, I wasn't there at this junket, but this one almost kind of felt like a one-on-one with Mari Cartel. She
did a good job.
She did. And shout out to Mari. Nice job on this one. I think I heard Jeff Shore once or twice, but this is probably something that's worth talking about. This is something that would happen where everyone in the room would just sort of get